thank you everyone for joining us today. We're here with another Art Talks here at the Blanden Art Museum, and due to the uncertainty of everything going on in the world, this is a way for the Blanden Art Museum to connect the artists that we have on display with you, our members, and our viewers. And so this will be available through our Facebook page and also on our YouTube channel. And there'll be several different ways that you can find the links for that. We'll actually have a page in the upcoming newsletter that will have a QR code that we like to use here and link information to our YouTube channel to see not only this video but other videos here at the Blanden Art Museum. And you know, we provided a lot of different videos, not only of myself talking about different artworks, but also there's art activities available on there, and then also too, this is the second one of the art talks that we have done here at the museum, and we'll kind of keep these going throughout the year with every artist that we bring in. And with that, I would like to welcome Emily Verdoorn, who is an artist out of Des Moines, Iowa here, who has done these fantastic pen and ink drawings, very intimate in scale, of interior spaces, and that is also the name of the exhibit, Interior Spaces. So if you haven't seen it yet, please stop down at the museum. We're open Wednesday through Saturday, temporarily 1 to 4. Please stop in and see us. We're hungry for visitors to come and visit the museum because we really do have this outstanding exhibit going on, along with all the other two exhibits that we have, just full of beautiful artwork here at the Blanden Art Museum. And if you don't know where we're at, we're located in Fort Dodge, Iowa, 920 3rd Avenue South. And so we're kind of tucked in a little historical residential area, but please do come and spend the afternoon with us. We're waiting for you to come, so thank you. And with that, we'll get right into it. So thank you, Emily, for coming today and talking to us about your amazing artwork and your drawings here. So we'll just kind of get into the questions here. So can you tell us a little bit about your background? You know, where you were raised, kind of your artistic background, and maybe where you went to school as well. So
so I'm from Des Moines, Iowa. I was born there. I've lived all of my childhood up through high school in one house. So that sense of kind of like place and belonging was always there. And then I moved around a fair bit after graduating from high school. So I spent a semester in Colorado doing a semester gap program thing. And then I spent 3 years in Mississippi going to Belhaven University, where I studied visual art.
Okay.
And then after that, I came back to Des Moines for a little while, for a couple of years, and taught art lessons just in the area, mostly to homeschool kids, but a range of different ages, school backgrounds, all sorts of things. And then I spent another summer in Colorado, and then I've spent the last year teaching at a private school in Waco, Texas.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So kind of meandering around a little bit in the Midwest region, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm from the Midwest, and every time that I leave, I'm like, my heart's still Midwestern.
Yeah.
So that's.
No, I understand fully. It's very similar. I haven't really, traveled too far away from center. Is basically what it is. So, well, good. So, what made you interested in pursuing art?
Yeah. I have enjoyed making things for as long as I can remember. Since I was really little, I remember reading my mom read a lot to us, just read aloud picture books and things, and I would look at the pictures for hours at a time, and then I would draw some of the pictures just from the books themselves, just copy them. My mom encouraged us, and then my family was pretty, we read a lot and we liked to make things. So I just remember spending a lot of time in my backyard making things out of popsicle sticks or out of sculpty clay or just out of whatever I could find
Yep.
markers and things like that. So it was just kind of a natural part of what I would do with all my free time as a kid. But then I started taking more formal art lessons and being like, oh, this is something I'm really interested in and want to become better at. I'm not just unselfconsciously playing. It became more of like, I want to devote time and attention to actually gaining more of a skill.
Okay.
And that happened in later high school, and then by that time I was so invested in it that it just seemed really natural to study it in college.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I had like a huge plan for a career in it as much as I just loved doing this thing and I couldn't imagine not doing it.
Yeah.
And so that's when I decided
Yeah.
to study it in school.
You knew that you had to do it. And you
I
didn't
just-
know where it was going to take you.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Totally know all about that. That's, and I don't know for you, I had at least a parent, says, well, what are you going to do with it,
Yeah.
and always trying to push me into like the teaching aspect. I wasn't really so much interested in teaching. It's like I just want to make things.
I want to make things.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's just like this drive. And,
Yeah.
and I don't know if, even today, I don't know if you feel the same way sometimes where if you haven't made something in a little while, you get cranky.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's when I knew, like, okay, yep.
Yeah. It's like, and people are like, well, what's wrong with you? It's like, I haven't made anything for a while. And then they're like, well, just go do something. I'm like, you don't understand.
I gotta make something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, good. Was there any, and this is not one of the questions, but this
Okay.
kind of plays off of the other,
Yeah.
the previous question, is that, during this whole thing, did you ever think about maybe doing something else? I mean, was it always, I'm interested in just creating and was it creating with pen and ink? Did you know exactly, or was it just, I just want to be a creative person?
I knew that I really liked drawing
Mm-hmm.
because I would copy like things out of children's books since I was little, or things like that. So I knew I loved drawing and painting. I think it got refined a lot in the last maybe 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
So I definitely didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
For a little while I thought I might be a scientist, but mostly because I wanted to draw the illustrations in science books.
Yep. Yeah.
And then I was like, wait a minute, I don't actually want to be a scientist, I just like the illustrations.
Yeah.
So.
I think it's interesting. But, and I would say, it's like, well, I think art is a science in itself,
Sure,
because
yeah.
it's a lot of like, exploration, discovery, and theories. You're testing things constantly. You're problem solving
Absolutely.
things. So I think there's an element of science to the creative process that I don't think art, is appreciated within art as much as it should be.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
what does your work aim to say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting process because it's a bit more roundabout for me. So a lot of times when I'm making things, I'm not coming at it like I want to say this thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a process of paying attention to the things around me and then bringing like my whole person to either representing that thing
Mm-hmm.
or interpreting that thing in more of an abstracted way. And then I don't know exactly what it wants to say. I don't know if you've ever read Walking on Water by Madeleine L'Engle or something like that. She talks about listening to the work. So it's instead of like me telling the work, this is what you are saying, it's more like a conversation. Like I'm bringing myself to the work and then asking it, like, what do you want to say? But it's not quite as like formulaic as that. It's a little bit messy and like sometimes I don't know for a while. And I usually don't know until after I've made several pieces, and then like a path starts to form.
Yep.
And then it's like, oh, these, when they're grouped together, are starting to speak to each other and say something.
Yep.
So when I was working on a lot of black and white drawings of the places around me, at first I was just paying attention to the things around me and drawing them because they were interesting. But then they started kind of speaking about place and what we bring to places, but also like our fingerprints almost.
Mm-hmm.
on these places and how
Like
they're
the
kind
residue.
of like the residue of us on a place.
Yeah.
Even in this picture, there's the books in the corner are the books my sister happened to be reading at the time.
Okay.
Like they're not contrived at all; they were just there.
They're not a prop. They're actually
Yeah.
physically being used.
Yep.
They're being read. They're
Yep.
being
Exactly.
digested.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's just what was out in my living room
Yeah.
at the time.
Or like I think another good one, the one of the room over here with the dressers all.
Yep.
I've experienced that multiple different times where you're, going through clothes and
Yep.
trying to find something to wear
Right.
for the day, and it's just like I gotta go. And you leave
Yeah.
everything as it is, and it's not staged. It's just
Right.
real life experience. So
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I think. Kind of the immediacy of working in pen and ink helped with that, because then it could be like that moment, and I was working with pretty simple materials, so I draw on location most of the time, so I was just drawing the thing in front of me, and gradually some of its voice started to come out.
Okay, well, good. Have you ever thought about exploring these same interior spaces in a different medium? And so what is it about the pen and ink that you're interested in, or have you explored these other avenues?
Partly I would like to explore other avenues. I'm interested at least to see what color can do, and bringing some either colored pencils or things like that into it. But the thing about pen that I really love, and I think that will stick with me, is how immediate it can be, and like that kind of closeness, because it is just a pen and paper and me on like a little camp stool or something like that. So pretty minimal materials so that I can be present in the moment and not have to come back to it so many times that the books that are being read change or whatever like that. And I also like how small the pen is, because I can get at a lot of the little details which matter to me a lot.
Yeah.
I think I really appreciate the specificity that comes with recording like the details that don't seem like they should matter, but they do.
Yeah, those little, you're talking about the little differences in variety and value or shading, right? Those little aspects that are just made up of your very simple, just marks. I mean, they're just marks. You're not fussing around with, trying to get the tone just right with a paintbrush and paint. That's the other thing that you talked about. I mean, very straightforward, very simple, very easy. You can shove your whole studio really into a bag and take it with you.
And take it with me.
Yeah,
exactly.
other artists like me, it's like that'd be virtually impossible because I've got totes and totes and totes just full of just stuff.
Which is great too.
Yeah. But I think so. Getting back to the simplicity of your approach to creating these, and you kind of, I think, loosely touched on it briefly when you were talking about it. But do you ever see any of these as a form of like meditation or reflection? Does that ever come across?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I think there's a contemplation that comes with paying attention.
Yeah.
Especially, I think when I have some color pieces that are more like Small Place or Huevos over there.
Yep.
Or not Huevos, Humus.
Okay.
And those are definitely even more meditative because I think, or prayerful, or I bring a lot of my more internal mind to it. These I'm responding to the places around me.
Yeah.
And those I'm definitely responding to places and things and textures and colors and light and everything around me, but I'm also bringing things within my own mind to it and interpreting them a little bit more, playing with dimensions and space and textures and things like that. And a lot more material. So those are a lot harder to pack up and bring anywhere. Because they're just a whole thing of materials.
Yeah. So let's talk about these a little bit more. These are your newest three pieces here, the ones with the color that are part of the exhibit. How did those come about? I mean, what was the major shift between these images of the interior spaces with these that are really not about interior spaces, they're like a physical interior space, but like you said, it's more about kind of a reflection and trying to communicate that in some way. So what was I guess, what happened between this one and like those?
Honestly, it was a gradual but kind of seamless process. So oddly enough, these, like the marks and the textures, are in the newer pieces. Especially like mark making vocabulary and things like that are right there. A lot of the places that I draw like in my sketchbook or something, which are just smaller versions of these kind of things, or unfinished ones or whatever, are in those too. So it's the same thing that I'm doing, I'm just bringing them in and arranging them and then adding more interpreted marks and textures and things. So it's not, I think of these more as like prose. So if I was writing like a story, like sometimes it feels like there's a story going on, or maybe an essay or something like that. And these I think of more like poetry. So they're still made up of words and a lot of the same ideas that are floating around in my head. But they're maybe just arranged in a way that's a little bit less upfront and more interpreted.
That makes sense. Where these are like more direct in terms of what they're trying to say. Where these, you're trying to communicate or express feelings, emotions, thoughts, and ideas, just like poetry does. I think that's a really good way of talking about it. I think, the visual poems. So good. Let's see. Do you think your work makes any comments on current social, cultural, or political issues? I know that's a big question.
Yeah, especially with a lot. I mean, that's a heavy question right now.
A heavy question right now.
If it does, it's kind of accidental. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't, because, like I said, I like to bring my whole person to making these things. And obviously, I'm influenced by everything around me. So I think part of it is there's a lot of noise in the world, and it feels full and overwhelming sometimes. So working on these is a way for me to be quiet. Things seem so fast, especially like social media things and political things, loud and fast and progressive. And these are more contemplative. For me, they require paying attention, and paying attention to small things for a long period of time. Like looking at something like a kitchen stove, for hours upon hours.
Take some patience.
Patience and attention and stuff that I think I just feel a little bit can be underappreciated in the fast-paced outer world. But that doesn't mean that's the only thing that's going on. I mean, the more true thing is those sort of quietness and paying attention.
So if they do speak in terms of like political, social, whatever, it's because you created them and you live within that same framework, and if it gets communicated through, I mean, it's just part of who you are.
Exactly.
And I think that I always believe, and it's taken me a while to see this in my own work, is that your work is really, what I want to say, like, not direct portraits of yourself, but like a psychoanalysis of yourself. I know that, one comment that's always stuck with me is, Jasper Johns was always trying to paint paintings where he wasn't in them. He found out that it was virtually impossible, because if you're creating them, you're in them. And so I think it can be said, the same is true with still lifes, or even images of different rooms and things. These are moments in your life being reflected and communicated through very simple means of the things that are basically around you. So I think that's where their power comes from. Is that they're images of some shoes or a desk by a window, but they have this this extra level of communication that talks about you as a person or me as a person. I can see myself within those settings. So I think that's very, very great in the power of these images. So what is your creative process like? How do you start? What kind of research do you do? Just kind of walk us through your day in the studio, let's say. So.
Well, it's usually starts by paying attention, and I do that primarily. I pretty much always have a sketchbook with me, and that's not it's not a perfect picture gallery kind of sketchbook. It's a working, messy. Sometimes I am making drawings in it. Sometimes it's just lists of things I need to do for the day. Sometimes it's quotations from books that I'm reading. Sometimes it's just thoughts or complaints or prayers, or sometimes it is drawings that are more involved and take more time. But starts with this just like paying attention. And I do a lot of drawing in there. And so a lot of times I'll start a drawing maybe of my living room and be like, hey, this is a good spot. I'm going to spend a longer period of time on a bigger piece of paper here.
Yeah.
And it's usually pretty immediate for like the pen and ink drawings. The thing is happening right in front of me. Sometimes things move around. Like my mom was in our kitchen one time and she moved the kettle over, and I was like, hey, wait, Mom, can you move that back? That sort of thing. Like, it's right there.
It's like I was drawing that.
I was drawing that. They've become kind of used to it.
Yeah.
And then the other more mixed media pieces also come from my sketchbook. Usually it's just that I start actually with those. I start with a bit more of an intuitive, like just putting some ink or paint or something on the paper to kind of like get rid of the whiteness. And then out of that, I bring details of things that I've drawn in my sketchbook, or marks that I've like, wow, that's a really interesting mark when you rub an onion on a piece of paper. It makes this kind of funny pink thing.
Okay. Yeah, you never know.
You never know.
You never know.
Or I think like, these are lovely leaves, I just want to draw them in. Yeah. What do you think about them?
Well, I was just going to say, I used to have a professor that we would do a lot of that kind of experimentation. She was a printmaking professor, and so she said, let's see what a hamburger from McDonald's looks like ran through the press with some ink on it. So I'm like, I think that sounds reasonable. Right. I think rubbing on a piece of paper. Sure.
I think that's where it's like science again. You just do like kind of crazy experimentation, and a lot of times it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does.
Sometimes it does. And I think that's, when it does, magnificent. Even when it doesn't, magnificent.
Yeah.
I mean, it's another piece of vocabulary that you can either ignore or accept within your visual dictionary or encyclopedia, whatever you choose to do. So, well, good. So, your process more or less happens spontaneously, with sometimes with some direction, but you pay a lot of attention to your observations through life. Is that kind of a clear way to put it?
Yeah,
or
definitely.
A different way to put it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's really good. I think a lot of people get hung up in terms of like, well, how do I start, or what do I focus on, or what do I create, and I think they never get past that point, and the point is just to start.
To start and pay attention to what you're drawn to.
Yeah.
Like I love, for some reason, I absolutely love when Queen Anne's lace, the plant that it was just around in the roadside ditches in August. Now it's almost gone, but this is my favorite part of it.
Yeah.
Is like it's white in like August, but then it kind of curls up and becomes brown. September, October, and lasts all through winter.
Yeah.
And that like really intricate brown, crusty Queen Anne's lace that's around in wintertime, I love that. It's like this little world.
Yeah.
And so paying attention to that thing that like, what is it that's just making me like light up when I see this thing?
Yeah.
There's something there in that. So finding out what that is, maybe drawing it 100 times to find out what it is.
Yeah.
That's where it starts, like with a kind of a love instead of like at least for me, it starts with a love or desire rather than a concept.
Yeah.
And
No,
that can help get people started.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good way of putting it. You know, interested enough to seek out why you're attracted to it or this or that. You know, and that's kind of the process. I've heard it. You know, some artists will say it's like, you know, I go into the studio to try to create something that I hadn't seen before. But
Sure,
there's other
yeah,
people that
yeah.
go in and just say, I love this thing and I don't know why, and so
Yeah.
I'm going to paint it or do it over and over and over again until I figure it out.
Yeah.
And it could be a lifelong journey.
Right.
And they may never figure it out.
Right.
You know, and so
Yeah.
sometimes, you know, it can be obsessive. Do you ever feel obsessive about?
I do feel obsessive about
Okay.
some things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think some people would maybe agree. You know, with just the marks alone can be kind of obsessive.
They
but
can.
I think,
Yeah.
but I think they play very well in terms of the subject matter that you're looking at, the way you're creating the images, and you know how they're coming all together. So it's this nice little balance between obsessive mark making, but meditative. You can feel the meditative quality to that obsessiveness. You know, so let's see. And I think you've answered this. I think throughout some of the other questions, but how has the process for you changed, let's say, over the last 5 to 10 years? I know we've talked about the interior spaces are quite different than these new ones, and these are the newest ones here, the colored ones. But even looking back, further back, are these drastically different than things you were doing 5 to 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is where, like, I'm at the pretty early stages of art career
Okay.
type of thing. So 5 or 10 years ago, that was like I was in college. I graduated from college 3 years ago, so like that was in the whole space of like the intensity of college. So
Yeah.
let me explain this a little bit. I did my all my like general ed stuff before I went to Mississippi to go to college at Belhaven. So then when I actually got to Belhaven, I pretty much just had art classes, and I've never spent so much time just like in the creative process. Like
Yeah.
that was really intense. So of course I felt like intense growth happened in that time, which is true for probably anybody who goes to art school. It's
Yeah.
just
Who takes it seriously?
really intense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I took it pretty seriously and had a good time. I loved it.
Yeah.
So like just spent hours and hours in the studio during the day and at night and all this stuff. So I feel like that's when I got more of a voice,
Okay.
which is probably true for a lot of people who.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you spend a lot of time doing something.
Yeah.
So before then, I would say I was pretty derivative. Like I said, I'd copy things out of children's books a lot,
Yeah.
which is totally fine for learning.
Yep.
And great, and I enjoyed it. And I think I appreciated those books more because I spent time with them. But I don't think I had a voice to speak of. Like you couldn't tell my work from anybody else's in particular. So I think the last 5 or 10 years have been a process of developing a voice.
Focused on you and how
Yeah.
you communicate
Yeah.
and how to purify that, or at
Right.
least make it individual enough that
Right.
people can see it. So,
Yeah.
no, those years in intense creative process, multiple years, can chew you up.
They can.
It's like,
It can be intense.
It is. I mean, and it pushes you to the limits on multiple different levels
Yeah.
because you're and if you're really into it seriously enough, you're just pushing yourself, and I don't know if it was the same with you, but for me, when I was in school, I would get in competitions with some of my friends. When I had a lot of friends, and then you go in to see what they're doing. I was like, oh shit, I should be doing,
Right.
I should be doing this. It's like, and then you go back to your studio and they kind of sneak in yours, and it's this competition, and you always are trying to one up each other, and that's the way, at least for me, I felt. I always felt like I had two really great friends in school, and I would just absolutely love what they were doing. And I'm like, well, I should be doing that too, and so I'd like drive myself. It was like a way to drive myself
It is it was like a sharpening process. Like, man, they're doing so well. I want to, but I think I felt it in a pretty encouraging way. Like, wow, that's so cool what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like, that inspires me to do what I'm doing, because I think I see it in less of like a hierarchical, like they're doing a lot better than me, or at least I try to.
Yeah.
I don't know. This
Yeah.
is always a struggle. Like, less of like they're doing so much better than me than like they're tending their plot of ground really well. I want to tend my plot of ground really well, and we can both be like
I could
there.
see that.
But at the same time, that's like always a constant.
There's a
struggle.
competition.
It's not easy. That's
No,
not like, oh yes, I've mastered this. It's
Yeah,
like that's the struggle. That's what I want to see.
Or like you hear that they're in a show. It's like, well,
Why didn't I
why
get
am I
in
not
that
in a show?
Right.
You know, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It's like, and then you go out and try to do it. You know, so
Yep.
it's good competition, not bad competition. It's
Right.
good competition.
Yeah.
I think competition
Sharpening.
and sharpening is probably a better way to do it, and it feels less threatening.
But sometimes it's really hard.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. Who was your biggest influence, would you say, in terms of, not only other artists, but, maybe other professionals, other people in your life? Where was those big influences?
I love to read, so the books I read are a really big influence on me. So for one thing, I mentioned this a lot already, but like even this last year, I can go into a bookstore and spend hours in the children's section just like picking up colors or appreciating the story, or like, wow, the subtlety of the way that they draw their whatever is really interesting to me. So like children's books are huge for me. But also kind of in that same vein, whenever I like see an illuminated manuscript like in a museum or something, I'm just enthralled by it. So those are really, I think, the detail, and again that meditative like attention really attracts me.
Yeah.
But then also just authors like Wendell Berry. I love his work. People who do just attentive world building like Tolkien. Who pays attention to, like, he built his own language.
Yeah.
And that kind of attention to detail is really, really influential. But
Yeah, good. What artists are you currently looking at?
Yeah, Andrew Wyeth is always one that I like a lot. I really like the work of Carl Larson, which he does a lot of interior, ordinary life spaces. I love the drawings of Van Gogh, especially. I get a lot of marks from just looking at his drawings.
Yeah.
Whenever I go to a museum, his work is very different than mine, but I love going to and just standing in front of a Mark Rothko. His work is very different, but also, like, again, that kind of contemplative, peaceful thing is something that I look for. So.
Well, it could be that the simplicity of
Sure,
the colors, the meditative quality of that work, I think, could be what you're picking up on. It's not about him. It wasn't about mark making. It was about these floating fields of color and how that influences, someone looking at it. So, good. Let's see. You kind of talked about that. What memorable responses have you had relating to your work?
Let's see. I like it. Like I said, I taught art lessons for about 3 years. So I guess I have a lot of kids who come to shows just because, I'm going to go to my art teacher's show. So I like seeing their responses, because kids have a way of paying attention again to things that I think adults can, and myself, can easily pass over.
Yeah.
So they're willing to do like the thing where you just look and look and look and see what else you can find. So that's really cool.
Well, and their responses are more honest and genuine. They're not laced with like correctness.
Yes, am I saying the right words? Am I doing the right things?
No, and I think that can be very meaningful too, having a clear, honest just response, I
Yeah.
think, is something that we all hope for, you know. Some days we don't, but a lot of times, you know, as artists, it's like, I really want your honest opinion so I can better myself or
Yeah.
look at it in a different way, because you're always constantly looking at it, and you'll see it one way until someone points it out a different way, and then
Right.
you can try to see it that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So kids. One of my art professors in college was kind of like a grandfather-like figure.
Mhm.
Really, he gave really good critiques and all this stuff, but also like he was really proud of you when you like. So I just remember being at my senior show and him walking through and just having this like look of pride on his face, and I was just like, oh, that just meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
Because he's someone whose opinion I obviously cared about a lot. He knows a lot, but he also cared about me.
Yeah.
And that meant a lot to me. So like people who, like even in just a small way, like when somebody I care about likes what I'm making, that means a lot to me.
Yeah. No, it does. I mean, it makes it feel like what you've been doing hasn't been a waste of time.
Yeah.
So, which is always great to hear.
Yeah.
And to feel. What is your best piece of advice you have been given throughout your career?
There was another art professor in college, Nate Tyson, who connected some dots for me about like the relationship between me and the work I was making, because sometimes it felt like I'm just going blindly into this. Like I don't know what I'm doing, what's going to come out of this. Especially I was in college, I was trying to figure things out, and I'm still trying to figure things out. But I think I felt especially like, what am I doing? My senior show is coming up.
Yeah.
What am I making? I don't know. And then there's also like this struggle between just like, so on one hand, like kind of walking blindly, like what am I making? And on the other hand, trying so hard to say something. Like I want to have something important to say. And so he connected those two for me in a really helpful way. So it was more of an analogy than like a saying, but he talked about making artwork kind of like planting a garden or something like that. So there's a lot of work involved, like really hard work. Some of the hardest workers I know are farmers or gardeners or people who like get into the soil. So you till the ground and you dig the holes and you plant the seeds and you water them and you weed and you take care of them and you worry about them through like weather and stuff like that. But you don't ultimately like pull the thing out of the ground. There's some kind of mystery or almost kind of feels like magic that happens, that the plants grow and there's a life to them too. So seeing making artwork as like putting in a lot of work, but I'm not ultimately the one that makes it grow. There's a life there too that I'm listening to. Like, oh, the plant looks dry. It might need more water.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's simple. Not like there's so much more to actual farming. But seeing like it's a cooperation between me and the work. I'm not just blindly like held by the work, and I'm not like in charge. It's like this mutual thing.
Yeah.
So that was really, I think that's an
really
analogy that stuck with me for a long time.
Yeah, and that's really fantastic advice, you know, to really think about it in that way. Yeah, I think that's really good. I'm going to write that one down later. So, because it is, I mean, it is really, it's about, and I've heard it too. It's like, you know, if you want more out of your work, you got to put more into it. And you usually have to do it, you know, 10 times to get the one thing out. You know, it's like making, you know, let's say, you know, it's very simple. It's like you make 10 paintings, and out of that 10 paintings, you have one that's the star.
Yeah.
You know, and you're like, oh, all the rest of these are kind of junky. You know, and you get kind of downtrodden by that, because I've had that experience where it's like, but the great thing is if you, the artist, can identify and say, that one is the star. At least you're communicating in a way that you understand. It's like, that one I know is good. may not, like, sometimes I know it's good.
Right.
Like, I don't know why it's good, but it's good.
What's happening?
But that one is fully grown and ready to harvest. So I think that's fantastic advice. Let's see. What does it mean for you to exhibit your work here at the Blanden Art Museum?
Yeah, like I said before, I'm pretty early on in the like career of art making, so it's a big deal for me. Like, I've never exhibited in an actual museum before. I've shown in some galleries, and I mean anything from coffee shops to like art galleries to just like fairs or shows and things. But I've never actually exhibited in a museum, and so like showing my work here is like a new stepping stone, and also like appreciating that other people invest in the museum and care about what shows are happening, and being like, wow, I can contribute to that too, and I'm thankful for that opportunity. And like yeah, it's kind of like humbling to be like, wow, there's a lot that's been going on here for a long time, and I can add a little bit to that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, knowing that you're part of this, 88-year legacy that's been the Blanden Art Museum, and I think that's a lot of the artists that have come through here. That's one thing that they say. It's like, just being a part of this, and this museum is just an amazing little thing in the middle of the state. No one knows about, which we're trying to help. So please come down and see us, or come up and see us, or come over and see us. But yeah, I think even for me, working here, because prior to me working here, I didn't even know this place existed, and if I would have came here more often. I know I would have, but it's a thing. You just don't know it's here until you're here. Like,
and then you're like, where did this beautiful building come from?
Yeah, and where did, this amazing artwork, that's always been here. It's like, you feel like you've been left out of the know, So we're trying to, it's one thing that we're trying to do is get people in the know. And, another thing for me at least is inviting, artists that are still young in their career to be able to exhibit and kind of start building that resume, and hopefully this is a stepping stone to other great opportunities. And if the museum plays a little role in that, I think we've done our job. And like I say, I tell a lot of people, it's like, my job here is to just make the work that's already been created look better. And I do that by just hanging it up on the wall and making sure the lights are correct, making sure that they've got enough space, and that there's rhythm or communication that's happening between the pieces and stuff. And that's my role. But all the other work is the artist's responsibility. They need to make it, and then I need to find them, or they need to come to me and say, hey, I'd like to do this, and then I do this and present it to people that visit the museum. And this year, I know it's such a rough year, because, like I said, we like to have people here at the museum. We like to throw openings where we invite people to be part of a social event, and having one-on-one experience with the artists is what people really are looking for. Especially in this community, it seems like, because they don't have those opportunities very often. And so that's one thing that I miss. I miss having a crowd of people huddled in the gallery, looking at the work, having conversations either about work or different things and that. And it just adds to the energy of the museum. And we'll get back there eventually, and we'll probably have to invite you back here maybe in another 5-10 years. We'll see where you're at, and we'll hopefully be able to have opening receptions then.
That'd be cool.
So lastly, is there any work that you would like to maybe talk about directly? Is there anything that's hanging up on the walls that you would just like to communicate a little bit more about?
Let's see.
Maybe talk about these two,
Foliage.
drawings here that are on the corner wall.
Sure, yeah.
So I think you talked briefly about kind of what I think they're communicating that, you're talking about the, what was it?
Queen Anne's lace.
Yeah.
It always comes with this gesture for me.
Kind of, gathering together, and you're
Yeah.
interested in that, and I think I see that reflected within these. And I
Yes.
know that they're not the Queen Anne's lace.
Right, but
They're some, they're another plant or something like
Yeah.
that. So maybe talk about those two.
sure, yeah. So actually, that is true that they would have started with drawing Queen Anne's lace. I don't know why I drew this silly Queen Anne's lace like time and time again. Like my sketchbooks are full of drawings of Queen Anne's lace. That's not even like, it's not like what people would consider pretty anymore. It's brown and wintertime Queen Anne's lace. For some reason it was fascinating to me because it's these little stems held with the seeds inside. And that shape was really interesting. So I drew the actual thing. But then I think that shape maybe just got into my blood or something. So a lot of my more abstracted or more interpreted pieces have a similar like curling in shape.
Yeah, because you can see it in these too, I
Yep.
guess. Yeah.
Yep, so that similar like enclosed, almost protected, but they're seeds.
Yeah.
I mean, so they're like protected in the wintertime, enclosed shapes, but they're holding like a life that's bigger than them, and that can be planted again in the spring.
Yeah.
So actually these two black and white ones on the edges were probably the transition ones between drawing more like prose
Okay.
pieces
Yeah.
into the poetry ones. The black and white ones came. I still wasn't working with color much, and I was still very much representational. They're drawing detailed things of pieces of nature that I find, but kind of in that closed-in shape,
Yeah.
arranging them together,
Yeah.
and then high contrast kind of things.
So I guess expanding on that a little bit more in terms of that closeness, is that in a way your, let's say, subconscious trying to communicate something to you about maybe a fear you have, or an anxiety that you have, or uncertainty you have, and so you're really focused on these things that are protective,
Sure. Yeah.
whereas you're in this transition to something that maybe I don't know that
It could be, yeah. I think they're new enough that I'm not quite sure yet, but I think it could be. I've always had an interest in like place and belonging, and what makes us come alive in places that like are. That's where I think they're still in the vein of some of these pieces that I call prose pieces, because they are about place being held or kept, or things like that. And part of that could be out of either fear. I mean, fear is a real and present thing, especially in a scary world.
Yeah, especially nowadays.
Yeah. So it could be out of fear, and it also can be out of love or trust. And I think it can be both of those without contradiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I hadn't really thought of it.
Well, and listening to you talk too, and I had a crazy thought where, what if these are inside of those? So these have all been about being inside of that protective shell.
Yeah.
Where now you've managed to pull yourself outside of it, and you're looking at the outside of the structures.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
And so it's like you've taken yourself from the inside and only focusing on what's in here.
Right.
And at some point, you brought yourself out.
And
now you're looking at the outside structure.
Interesting. I've never thought of that.
Because you talked about these being, kind of, and they relate, because you are right.
Spaces.
These are our shells that we protect ourselves with, and have been protecting ourselves, especially now during this, the COVID-19, situation. But these are looking from the outside.
Yeah.
which is kind of interesting. So.
That is interesting. I'd never thought of that. That's again the pieces telling me things I didn't know, but
Well,
I think that happens.
And I think that, like I said before we started too, it's about the communication between people looking at artwork and coming at it in different ways and listening to certain things. And, and I know that that's an aspect of school that I miss. Because you don't get that.
Yes.
Because you probably spend a lot of time by yourself now, whereas in art school, you had amazing opportunities and you're constantly talking to people. At least I did. I talked to people
it was
every...
all the time.
Yeah.
That's the life of
And
the
you don't do
studio.
that. You don't get that now.
Not as much, no.
And
I mean,
so,
being part of an artist community can be really helpful, but that comes and goes.
Yeah. Because most of the time as an artist, you're working by yourself.
Yep.
But the opposite, and the other side of that is that we need other people.
We do.
Because they help us see things that we may be too close to see.
Yes. Yes.
And so I think that's an important thing to kind of, make sure people understand. It's like, as an artist, you do spend a lot of time with yourself, but you really, really, really need other artists, or at least other creative people that can talk to you and look at your work and maybe tell you things that you didn't even think about or
Absolutely.
didn't know. So,
yeah, for sure.
And I think that's what, at least for me, and it's probably the same for you, is what exciting about being an artist and a creative person is that whole process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So, well, I think with that's all my questions. Unless there's another piece of work that you want to talk about. But I thank you again for coming up to Fort Dodge from Des Moines. And, the people that have been through the galleries have been really kind of amazed and fascinated by the work. We've had quite a few visitors, even though we are, slower pace. We've had a lot of visitors come through and spend quite a bit of time up here. And I think they find them, again, your drawings very intimate and interesting. And I think these really want you to spend more time with. Not only their scale, but also the way you draw them and what you're drawing too. Because it can be, and I think you said that, it can be like a search and find, like those the kids' books where you have to find the little things, So with that, I thank you again for letting us have your work here up in the walls. And like I said, if we could have an opening, I would, and we'd be drinking lots of wine and enjoying company of friends and family and everything. But until then, please check out check out our Facebook page for constant posts and promotions that we're doing for the museum. For different events and activities that might be coming up, you can search out on our Facebook page, but also on our website, blanden.org. If you want to know more about Emily's work, you can also visit the museum, but you can also check out your website.
Yeah, emilyverdoornstudio.com.
Okay, and I'm sure if you're interested in any of the work here on display, you can either contact me and I can put you in contact with Emily, or maybe shoot Emily an email from her website and saying, hey, saw your work at the Blanden, very interested in it. So with that, please come and see us here at the Blanden Art Museum. We're open again Wednesday through Saturday, 1 to 4, and we look forward to seeing you all here sometime soon. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.